Breaking news at 11, Israel launches new airstrikes on Gaza.
At least 400 people have been reportedly killed from surprise Israeli airstrikes.
Particularly young children being rushed into hospital, small lifeless bodies being held by parents as they try to get treatment for their children. Many of them, it's simply too late.
My proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and unifier. That's what I want to be, a peacemaker and a unifier.
While I was in the process of reading this article, it seems that the Israeli occupation forces have heavily started bombing Gaza. We're going to switch gears back to that. Here's Zana. Israel is heavily bombing Gaza again. There is no ceasefire. Israel is repeatedly and single-handedly violated again and again. Domestic repression of protests and speech does not coincidentally coincide with Israel's renewed siege and bombardment of Gaza. I received the following text from a friend here. Huge explosions now, Zana, as if it's the apocalypse. All parts of the Gaza Strip are now under heavy bombardment. I just heard. There's no news about it here. It's so scary. How are you doing? The family. CNN. Israel says it's conducting extensive strikes against Hamas and Gaza, throwing doubt on the fragile ceasefire. Trey Yingst, on the other hand, says the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is over. Israeli jets are now striking Gaza. Why is CNN talking about, throwing out fragile talks about the ceasefire when you got people like Barak Ravid? Israel resumes military operations against Hamas and Gaza after the group rejected U.S. proposal for extending the ceasefire. Israeli Prime Minister's office says, here's a statement from Benjamin Netanyahu's office. Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz have directed the IDF to act forcefully against the Hamas terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip. This comes after Hamas repeatedly refused to release our abductees and rejected all offers it received from U.S. President's envoy Steve Witkoff and from mediators. The IDF is currently attacking targets affiliated with the Hamas terrorist organization throughout the Gaza Strip, with the aim of achieving the war goals defined by the political echelon, including the release of all of our abductees, living and dead. From now on, Israel will act against Hamas with increased military force. The operational plan was presented by the IDF at the end of the last week and approved by the political echelon. The war has returned again. At least 15 people, including 5 children, have been killed across Gaza. Gaza civil emergency reports. Palestinian civil emergency reports at least 35 airstrikes across Gaza, hitting Khan Yunis, central Gaza, and Gaza City, according to Al Jazeera English. At least 8 people have confirmed being killed in Gaza City. Tents in central Gaza have also been struck. Video shows killed and injured, including children arriving at the Indonesian hospital following strikes in Beit Hanun and Beit Laiha project in the north. Al Jazeera Live with Moin Rabbani.
The other comment I would make is that Israel could not be doing what it is doing tonight without the approval of the United States. If Washington sends orders to Israel that Israel is required to implement the agreement and to basically stop the slaughter of the Palestinians, it would immediately end.
Just to be clear on what you're saying, you believe that the United States will have known that Israel was going to carry out these strikes, and it's doing it with the backing.
And I think there are already reports that the Israelis are stating that they informed the Americans beforehand, which is another way of saying they sought and received U.S. permission prior to launching these strikes. Now, as far as the American attitude is concerned, that's also a little unclear. Do they hope to use these Israeli strikes, killing dozens of Palestinians, as a negotiating tactic, so to speak, to increase the pressure on Hamas?
What is your sense? Is this a negotiation tactic, or is this the end of the ceasefire?
A negotiation tactic.
It's really difficult to say at this point. I suspect that
that's crazy.
From the American perspective, it's being seen as a negotiating tactic.
What a crazy way to negotiate.
To use this to derail the agreement in their
Let's
entire.
just kill 30 civilians and
so
continue.
We'll have to see how this plays out. Hamas, from its perspective, believes it has shown flexibility by agreeing to a limited extension of the first phase, provided that serious negotiations immediately commence on the second stage. And this is something that appears to have been
it's like claiming that you're haggling to buy a horse by stealing the horse and then beating the shit out of that person. But you're like, well, I was just haggling.
To us on the news,
$0 for this horse.
Well, how much appetite? I mean, you're in the States. We've seen protests restart in various places around the world, including Canada, against the recent blockade by Israel. How much appetite is there? How is the world going to stomach Israel going back in this way and killing dozens of Palestinians once again when they're already so clearly on their knees?
You know, that question can be asked in two ways. The international community and increasingly public opinion in the West.
Of course, it's Trump approved. Yeah, of course. Two Israeli officials told me that Israel notified the Trump admin in advance of the airstrikes and briefed it on the objectives. Look at that. Uniparty, baby. King Uniparty.
Only the Trump administration, but also very much its predecessor, the Biden administration, which is not only lending their support or acquiescence to what Israel is doing, but is complementing it by launching unprecedented campaigns.
Hello?
Now from Hamas, according to a senior Hamas official talking to Reuters news agency, Hamas saying Israel is unilaterally ending the ceasefire agreement. Where does this leave Hamas, do you think? I mean, how do they respond to what is happening now?
Well, again, you know, I'm less interested in what Hamas says or thinks or what the Israelis say or think, because, again, the key decision about what's next is going to be made in Washington. As far as your question is concerned, I think Hamas will basically have the same position that it did during the past 15 months, which is of using the resources at its disposal to deny Israel the ability to basically declare a victory over the Palestinian people and to objectives of eradicating this movement either militarily or as a governing force in the Gaza Strip. And again, you know, this may be either a short, sharp series of strikes or a longer-term campaign.
It's crazy because Donald Trump is supposed to be talking to Putin tomorrow, right? If I'm not mistaken. And he has mentioned that he's going to start talking about offering pieces of Ukraine to Russia in that conversation. Why do you think they decided to break the ceasefire themselves instead of waiting for a counterattack from Hamas by starving them? The fuck do you mean? Because there was no counterattack. What are you talking about? When the moment that they said that they are looking for a counterattack, that they said that there was going to be a counterattack by Hamas, we should have known that Israel is going to start bombing again. Israel has also never abided by the ceasefire principles at all. They literally shut off aid, humanitarian aid, a week ago. That's the reason why the Ansar Allah movement in Yemen restarted the blockade in the Red Sea, and then Trump responded by blowing up Sana'a and killing a bunch of children there, like 30 plus. Here's Zana's analysis on it. The next 24 hours could be the most critical 24 hours in the past 17 months. In less than 12 hours, Israel's launched multiple airstrikes in South Lebanon and South Syria, which have had their own cross-country violence at the border. While the U.S. has carried out major attacks in Yemen that killed upwards of 50 people, Israel has now also resumed heavy bombardment across Gaza. Iran is on high alert, anticipating a possible U.S. strike following Trump's threats. The Department of Defense just announced that 3 additional aircraft carriers are heading to the Middle East. I love the peace candidate, man. So we can say that the Trump ceasefire when he was inaugurated was just spectacles? No. It was so that he could engage in emergency funding to Israel. As I said at the time, the only important aspect of Trump's ceasefire was the fact that he was capable of getting Israel to. He could have kept re-upping Israel and rearming Israel without a ceasefire at all. But he did. He was able to get Israel to at least say yes to a ceasefire, maybe with assurances that Israel could pummel Gaza even more later down the line. But this is precisely what I told you. Trump's ceasefire proposal was most likely to, allow Israel more space to do this later down the line.
But what about the United States? I mean, are they going to just, given what we've seen in recent weeks, the involvement of Steve Witkoff in terms of getting the negotiations, the ceasefire negotiations back on track and so on, is the U.S. going to support the war just being resumed in this way? In short, yes. I think the Trump administration, with some exceptional moments, remains essentially beholden to the Israeli right or its representatives in the U.S., in our politics. And they don't seem willing to stand up for American interests. It's notable, for example, that the
U.S. hostage negotiator, Adam Boehler, was fired after the Israelis complained about him talking directly to Hamas and doing an interview or a series of interviews where he sort of differentiated between U.S. and Israeli interests and said, I'm not an Israeli, I don't work for the Israelis. So, the Trump administration maybe will change their stripes in the future, but at the moment, they seem even more eager than the Biden administration was to do the bidding of the Israelis and unwilling to stand up to them and say enough is enough.
Hamas has said in a statement that the Israeli government decided to overturn the ceasefire agreement and warned that this move exposes the remaining hostages of Gaza to an unknown fate. We demand that the mediators hold Netanyahu fully responsible for violating and overturning the ceasefire agreement, Hamas said. The Houthis went from looking for one piece to being in multiple pieces. Lamau is such a pathetic display of loserdom as an American citizen. In your mind, you think you're demonstrating a show of strength, and all you've done is bomb by using your free college tuition that's never going to happen, by using infrastructure spending that will never happen for you, by taking away your future and deploying it overnight to kill 50 civilians in Yemen. The American government once again is showing their major display of power. Meanwhile, this initiative that cost $1 billion when the Biden administration tried it was a failure.
Working. Well, when you say working, are they stopping the Houthis? No. Are they going to continue? Yes.
An abject failure. Like, you can fantasize about dominating the poorest country on the planet. You can fantasize about it, but that's not a display of power. It's a display of weakness. It's a display of how little the American government gives a shit about you, by the way, as well. They're doing this for Israel. The American government cares more about Israel continuing its genocide. All America's doing in its America First agenda is basically bombing Yemen because Yemen said that they would restart the blockade that they had stopped during the ceasefire because Israel was not following on the conditions of the ceasefire. They denied humanitarian aid from going into the Gaza Strip before actively bombing the Gaza Strip as they started tonight. Yeah, here, this is a perfect demonstration of what I'm talking about. I just saw this tweet on my timeline. Yeah. The Houthis are about to be eliminated from the face of the earth from breaking 911. My daughter's math class had to move to the cafeteria today because the roof has more leaks and the room had buckets. Think about that. Every dollar being spent on offensive weapons that are being used on random civilians and like children overseas is a dollar that could have been spent in your classrooms, is a dollar that could have been spent on fixing your potholes, a dollar that could have been spent on giving you free health care, giving you at-cost medicine, and you know that's never going to happen. So you have to sit there like a pathetic loser and celebrate the violence. Because if you don't celebrate that violence, after all of this is said and done, you have nothing, right? Like, all of this violence and display of force has to amount to something. Because if it doesn't, if we don't celebrate the cruelty for the pure sake of cruelty, then why is my school leaking, you know? Why are classroom sizes 48 people now? Why is it? It's because all that money is going to Israel and also in defense of Israel. Trading says horrific images already circulating from inside Gaza, the aftermath of Israeli airstrikes. One shows a small baby wearing a jumpsuit with rainbows on it who was killed. The death toll continues to rise. Talks of around 300 casualties around Gaza. Ambulances are now rushing. Casualties means dead and wounded, by the way. It doesn't mean just dead. Al-Aqsa Hospital is inundated with casualties. The number of doctors is not enough to treat the patients. No medical supplies and aid were allowed during the ceasefire. Just horrific images of unjustifiable cruelty coming from Gaza once again. The number of the dead has risen to 86.
The ceasefire.
The Israeli army has killed Major General Mahmoud Abu Wafa, Deputy Minister of the Interior in Gaza, following an airstrike targeting his home in Gaza City. There's also a ground invasion in West Bank right now from Mariam Barghouti. Israeli army is carrying out a large-scale aerial attack, carpet bombing in Gaza, and it's carrying out a large-scale ground invasion north of the West Bank with reinforcements sent to Jenin and Qalqilia. Yeah, the person that they killed, by the way, regardless of the title general, is a civilian position. Meanwhile, Trump is also violating all norms and all rules and what remains of the constitutional protections afforded to people here at the domestic front. Great stuff overall, just actively worsening the situation everywhere.